Hi, Michael Yardney here, and 2018 was an interesting year in our property markets, wasn't it? And clearly 2019 is going to again be a challenging year. Last year there was a whole combination of factors that came together to create what people like calling a perfect storm, particularly for house prices in Sydney and Melbourne. And this in turn created a downturn in our property markets nationally. Last year, finance was one of the big issues that slowed our property markets, but property's always been, or residential investments, always been a game of finance with some houses thrown in the middle. Last year was a combination of poor affordability, tighter credit conditions, with APRA's macroprudential controls affecting lenders' appetite for loans. At the same time, the banks started to become a bit allergic to risk. They were a bit nervous because of the Haynes Royal Commission. At the same time, this perfect storm had a whole lot of factors, including a significant surge in supply of apartments around Australia, at a time when there was a collapse in demand for foreign investment for that. Remember, a couple of years ago, all those new and off-the-plan apartments were being bought by foreign investors, but we pulled the welcome mat out from under them. At the same time, there was a fear, a crisis of confidence, particularly with investors. They were worried about potential changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax if there's a change of government later this year. And there was also the concern, what's going to happen with the banks? Are they going to swap their people's loans to principal and interest loans? So all this led to lenders lending less money, borrowers being able to borrow less money, and finance slow down this market. But in my mind, it was a orderly, orchestrated slowdown by our regulators. In my mind, this is not a crash because there's no forced sales. But I believe again in 2019, finance is going to be a major factor affecting property. And that's the reason why today I want to have a chat with leading finance strategist Andrew Myrams, Director of Intuitive Finance. So welcome, Andrew.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Good. Now, I know over the last year we've spoken often about the challenges that investors and home buyers are getting with finance. And so I'd like to spend a bit of time today having a talk about how to make ourselves a bit more attractive to the banks and what you believe is going to be happening in the world of finance. But based on my comments of what happened last year, have you got anything to add to those introductory comments?
No, I thought you summarised it really well. It's interesting, a lot of people are saying, when's it going to be easy again? And my first response to that is, well, it was never easy. It's just a little bit more difficult, or there's more scrutiny at the minute. And it's really, we're talking about the scrutiny. We're still getting loans approved every day. There's still people with the right that can balance everything with their income, with equity and everything like that. They're still open for business. In fact, in the middle of that decline in late last year, we saw, I think it was September, October, we actually had a boost in some of the housing finance approval figures. So people are still able to get money. The traditionalists and those who've been building wealth portfolios and been quite aggressive in those good times in Sydney and Melbourne, which, as you said, rightly, the regulators targeted just to slow the markets down and bring that orderly correction, they're the ones that are having a little bit more problems at the moment. But it's really the scrutiny that's the key, and that's come about through, as you said, the Royal Commission and other things like that.
Well, really, if 50%, there was a stage where close to 60% of all purchases in Sydney were by investors. That was unsustainable. It was unsustainable to have double-digit growth of house prices when wages growth wasn't going up. So there was the effect of lower interest rates, but that's worked its way through this cycle. There was the effect of easier lending, that's worked its way through the cycle. So this is now a period of more responsible lending. And yeah, it's not as much fun, but on the other hand, it means that our banking systems are going to be sound and solid, and this orchestrated soft landing means we're not going to have a crash that could have happened, probably would have happened if things had been left alone. So I think, despite it affecting me and a lot of our clients also, I believe it's been the right thing in the long term for our property markets. So on that basis, with banks having more scrutiny, being more careful, looking at your loans more carefully, let's go through a couple of things that can make us more attractive? Because as you said, the banks want to lend. It's their business to do that. They need to, their money shops. So what hints would you have for us, Andrew?
So, I think under the responsible lending guidelines, and we saw Westpac accepted quite a heavy fine, and that's subsequently gone back to court, and the federal court has said, no, well, we want to know the details of that. Really, we're talking about the scrutiny around living expenses. That's been the real, from 2018 and what will continue into 2019, it's going to be the scrutiny on your living expenses. We've always earned our money, and we have a life to live, and you have certain expenses that we all have. Some are discretionary, some are fixed, and then the balance is left to invest. So what we're finding and spending a lot of time on at the moment, and the key point that I can take for everyone into 2019, is know what it costs you to live, be ready to get some scrutiny around it. So if you say it costs you $2,000 a month to live, you're going to be put under enormous scrutiny, because I'll guarantee you that no one lives on $2,000 a month. There's no round figures or estimates or guesstimates or this and that. You need to look at things. Banks are starting to ask now for 3 months of your savings statements to look at both your income and your expenditure. They've been bound through the Royal Commission and through the regulatory environment to ask and make sure they're doing the right assessments on your living expenses. So make sure you know, firstly, what it costs you to live. If you've got a budget and you can stick to that. And again, we all have a little bit of discretion in our lives, Michael. So you've got to be able to pick apart what the discretion is and the fixed costs. So, the old fallacy of the more you earn, the more you spend. It's not because you have to, it's because most of the time you can. So we're seeing a few people being scrutinised because of their laziness at the moment with Uber Eats and Afterpay and things like that. That will damage your credit rating. So just be wary about what it costs you to live, and then be able to justify it.
So the aim behind this, if I understand correctly, Andrew, is to make sure that people can pay back the debt as opposed to just count on capital growth to minimise the debt.
Absolutely. And people that in the good times were taking interest only everything without any balance, that at some point in time in the future, their interest only period was going to expire. And if they could only afford it under that scenario, then there's some potential for some people to be hurt. And they're going to have to moderate their living expenses if they're going to be forced to go to principal and interest repayments. So that's what they're trying to work through now, making sure there's a balance. And I think we've said that in your introductory, you said that it's all about getting the balance right. The banks are still open for business. People are still getting money. The regulators don't want to grind the market to a halt, but they want an orderly correction where people, whether they're first home buyers, investors, downsizers, upgraders, everyone can get into the market.
So what you mentioned a moment ago is that B word that people don't like, have a budget, but really money management is an important part of property investing or owning a business, running a business, and property investment should be a part of it. So a budget is not just looking at what you'd spent before, even though that's important, but it's also allocating where you're spending your money in the future. And one of the lessons that I've often taught, Andrew, is it's important to spend less than you earn. You already hinted at the fact that as our wages go up, we buy a bigger car, we buy another TV or the latest iPhone or whatever. But if you don't spend less than you earn, you're always going to owe people money, and that's not the way to go ahead, Andrew.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And it sounds silly when you say it out loud, spend less than you earn, but so many people are now the rise of Afterpay and Tap and Go and these little things that are making it very convenient for people, young, middle-aged or old, to just go and pick up. In our day, Michael, we had lay-by, but yes, we had to pay it off. We didn't have a commitment. You could pay $10 a week, you could pay $20, $50, whatever, but you didn't get the item until you'd paid for it. Afterpay is very dangerous for people in terms of getting the money or the item up front and then you've got a fixed commitment over 4 or 8 fortnights where you've got to make it back. Now, banks are scrutinising that, and they're saying, well, you don't have the ability because you've got this afterpay commitment. So people are getting sucked in with credit cards and mobile phone payments and afterpay, and even tap and go. There's no responsibility on you until you just tap and there's no money left. People need to budget, and again, spending less than you earn just makes sense for you and I, but we're seeing a rise and rise of people that just actually can't budget, don't budget, won't budget. And they're probably the same people that are screaming they can't get into the market. So there's got to be a bit of balance.
Andrew, I think a lot of people believe that money on their credit card limit is theirs, and it's not. It's the bank's money, and you're paying a high interest rate for the privilege of using it. And one of my concerns is the next generations aren't ever going to know or use physical money, and unless you actually have the feel of money and see it coming in and see it go out, this tap and go, this afterpay is really it's too easy to spend more than you earn.
I absolutely agree. If I had $1 for everyone that says, oh look, that's my limit but I never spend it, we'd be doing this video from the Bahamas, I think, because I'd be able to retire quite comfortably. It's about the limits, it's about what you can spend, and sadly in a strange society people get a limit and often get to that limit, as you just said, because they are spending more than they earn and they don't have the ability to repay it, and the convenience and the ease actually lures, and it's probably a lot of young people into, they come out of school, they go to university, they get their first job, and it's just easy. They're able to get a card or access to credit quite easily. That easy credit, the non-regulated credit. So that's where I think it's really dangerous. And good spending habits or good savings habits aren't actually taught anymore. I mean, we got taught by our parents, but the world is changing with the immediacy of everything nowadays. You can get information that we couldn't get 10 or 15 years ago. You can get that immediate information on a phone, and people want the latest phone, like you said. They want the latest things. The discipline of saving is a trait that we're seeing young people especially losing very quickly.
Now, I bet you there's some people watching this and listening to this, Andrew, saying, what are these two old guys on about? I want to get into the property market. I want the banks to lend me more. Give me the good stuff. The problem is this is the good stuff. This is the basics. And unless you get the basics right, the others it all falls apart later. Unfortunately, we see people who get a windfall, they suddenly get a boost in salary, they win the lotto, which isn't that often, they get an inheritance. But unless you have become financially fluent and learn how to work with money, unfortunately, once you get more of it, you're going to fall in a bit of a heap. So following on from what you said a moment ago, Andrew, about ways of getting yourself more attractive to the bank, of understanding your living expenses, being able to justify them, spend less than you earn. Clearly another important factor would be to pay your bills on time and pay your credit card off.
Yeah, there's as of the 1st of July 2019, everyone's gonna have comprehensive credit reporting and open banking is what it's called. So it's been in the media and it's been talked about for a little while, but on the 1st of July, every bank, every lender will have access to your credit worthiness.
Not just your own lender, any other one.
That's right. Everyone will be able to see your habits, your traits, and whether you're paying all your accounts on time. So they won't see your day-to-day banking, but in times past, you get a credit inquiry, and all it would say was there was an inquiry. As of the 1st of July, they're going to be able to see, is your savings account going overdrawn? Is your credit card payments late? Are you paying your utility bills on time? Are you managing your credit and your credit facilities well? Are your habits in check? Are you spending less than you earn? Are you on top of your living expenses? So we've been talking about this for a while, Michael, but on the 1st of July 2019, banks and lenders and everyone's going to have access to how you operate your day-to-day lives. And if you don't get these things in order, it's going to have a negative effect on your credit worthiness. But similarly, it'll have a positive effect. If you've got your living expenses and you've got everything in order, you will also get the positive benefits of that.
So the bottom line is there's no secrets.
There won't be any secrets after the 1st of July.
And that's the way some people, in my mind, manage to get those loans. So when you see in the front of the magazine somebody who's got 10 properties in 10 years, and you know, how can they do that? They haven't got the affordability. They weren't given responsible lending. I've come across some people, you probably have also, that seem to have just left out some of the facts when they applied for loans. And that's why one of those findings last year came up with that huge percentage of what they called liar loans.
Yeah. The non-disclosed credit card, I don't use it. It doesn't matter whether you use it or not. You have access to it. The understating of your living expenses, the overstating of your income, all of those things. So it's the squeaky wheel. It's always the small minority of people who do the wrong thing that then get these things implemented. And personally, I think a lot of this actually makes perfect sense. It's been in the UK for a long time, and they've seen post-GFC a great improvement in their credit standards and facilities. So I think all we're doing is really, when we've had responsible lending guidelines for some time, now we're actually going to have the ability to be able to say, look, we are meeting all the responsible lending guidelines. These people know what it costs them to live. They can justify, they're paying everything on time. And so they should get a positive benefit or a positive output on that basis, shouldn't they? And saying the ones that are doing the wrong thing should be affected to the negative side.
So looking at some structuring advice now, one of the lessons I learned through the recession we had to have, as it was called, the early 90s, when my cash flow decreased, when interest rates went up, when some tenants went bust, we went through a recession we had to have. I was lucky enough that I actually had set aside some lines of credit, some extra money that got me through. And during that time, a number of my colleagues, my friends, people who were involved in property development, as I was in those days, went bankrupt. I don't remember in those days anyone teaching me about the importance of buffers, but I had them. And I know you and I have been discussing this with our audience and our joint clients for many years. Now more and more people are mentioning the importance of that. But I believe that's one of the things that, not just now, but in these more challenging times, but one should always have just in case.
Yeah, it's very interesting, even hearing the Treasurer and political people, Reserve Bank, talking about buffers and things like that. So from the top prudential controls all the way down to household budgets, having some money aside for a rainy day, we never know. Like you said, we don't know if there's going to be a bump in the road. Probably, I think every year we get another great year of growth, you're probably getting closer to some event that we just can't forecast. The recession we had to have, the GFC, all these things pop up. That's part of the cycles. This cycle is a regulatory controlled one where they're trying to not get people into those situations. But sadly, we're seeing a demise of savings. People just aren't. And again, so the living expenses are spending less than you earn, all those things. We've had very low wage growth and people are trying to keep up. It is getting more costly to live. There's no doubt about that. But our parents and grandparents were always taught to save and put some away for a rainy day. Now, whether your buffer is a borrowed buffer and you're using your equity, or whether you actually start to take a commitment to put some savings away, I think right today it's vital that people are actually looking at their budgets and making sure they're putting some aside. Not putting some aside to go on a holiday, put some aside for that, absolutely, but also put some aside just for that rainy day, the event that we don't know that's going to happen, so that they can see their way through. I think that's vital, that people have just got their buffers and have access to cash in need of an event. We just don't know what's going to happen.
Well, I know you and I often suggest people having an offset account and putting their savings into that, which is a very tax-effective way of putting some money aside rather than paying down debt, and in that way you're going to have access to it without asking for permission. Now, another thing that always comes up...
Sorry, Mike, on that point, we would actually advocate multiple offset accounts. So you can actually put funds away, you can live through one, and then you can put that rainy day account or have your investment offset or have another one account. So multiple offset accounts. And again, we've been banging on about a lot of these things for some time now, haven't we? But these are the vital basics that are just going to see you through this next period of time. So, yeah, there's a whole range of ways you can do it with offsets and savings and things like that, where you're getting the best bang for your buck. But having something there is going to be really vital, I see, in the next year or two.
Now, that's interesting because that's the benefit you get from dealing with a finance strategist, which you are. And I know you're too modest to make a fuss about it, but I know you and your team have won multiple awards, and I know you've had many years in the banking industry before, now helping particularly property investors, that's your expertise, but also homeowners. And so the concept is, I know as a property investment finance strategist, you're not just thinking of getting this loan today, you're actually allowing our clients, our joint clients, because we have a lot in common, your clients, to buy time. Smart investors don't just buy themselves property, but by having buffers, by having the right structures, by having some loans fixed and some variable or whatever, they actually buy the time to go through the rainy day. So when talking about fixing loans, that's not necessarily in my mind, Andrew, to beat the banks, because you'll never do that, but it's again just a cash flow risk minimization strategy. In my mind, I don't see interest rates going up this year. Every month I'm one of the panel that spend time getting information from and then understanding where we think the interest rate market's going. And I see lots of reasons why possible in 2019 that interest rates should go down a bit. I don't think anything is going to happen before the election. I don't believe the Reserve Bank likes fiddling with interest rates before an election to change the outcome of what's happening in the economy. But last year, the Reserve Bank governors already met, or one of the deputy governors mentioned the fact that the Reserve Bank has the capacity, if this market slows down, to loosen the screws with lending, to lower interest rates. And we know in the past, state governments, federal governments have come in with various incentives, whether it's first homeowners grants or during the last downturn in the global financial crisis, they gave out incentives to, they were building schools and they're putting in pink bats. So there's lots of things the government can do the banks, the Reserve Bank can do if the market starts to slow down a little bit more. But having somebody smart on your side to work you through the maze of the various lenders and the various options is important. I know that's what Intuitive Finance do. I know one of the other things you mention to people is don't be lazy, don't cross-collateralize your loans, because that's really the easy way out, and that's what the banks would like if they had a choice.
Yeah, we saw a rise of it in 2018, actually, where clients going to the lenders and they're saying, oh, look, we're not sure, but if you give us all your properties and we mash it everything together, we think we can make it work. And that's just convenient for one person or one body, and that's the lender. That's the bank. That's whoever's saying that actually is only securing their position. You might think you're getting a good outcome, but it's never made sense. Now, I was a banker, and it's actually what we were taught to do because it was the best way to protect the bank. I've been now longer broking than I was banking, so very quickly your opinion changes on the other side to doing the right thing for the client when you see the outcomes that cross-collateralizing can do. So, and we've talked about if you've got fixed rates maturing or interest-only loans maturing, or you want to sell a property, or the values go down, one goes up, one goes down, you've still got net zero. There's a whole range of things. And if lenders are saying right now today, give us and lock in all your properties, and that's how you'll get money, that in the current environment is more dangerous than I think than it's ever been, Michael. And because we're suffering a little crisis of confidence. At the end of the day, for the Reserve Bank to all of a sudden now be saying the next move in rates could be down, that's because consumer confidence has been dented. The sensationalist media that's spruiking and getting their papers sold and everything like that, that's all about just news today. It's clickbait, it's the fish and chip wrappers tomorrow, but it's getting people very nervous and it's changing opinions, and consumer confidence is the one thing I think what the Reserve Bank really pointed at, that's why we might need to. We've had low wages growth, which you mentioned earlier. So if we've got low wages growth and inflation's in check, then there's a few checks and balances they can do to try and get the consumers spending.
Well, you're 100% right, Andrew. It's consumer confidence that has been one of the major factors that's made the markets last year and heading into this new year slow down, because the underlying fundamentals are good. The economy is still strong, maybe not as strong as the Reserve Bank liked. The last quarter came down a little bit. Population growth is good. Jobs are going up. Everyone who wants a job can get a job. But people are lacking confidence, and that's scaring them a little bit. And that's a lot of it's done by the media. So you've often heard me say, don't make your 30-year investment decisions based on the last 30 minutes of news. But I think another concept that I know you've been explaining to your clients is being open to considering various options, because there's not just 4 or 5 big banks, are there? There's second-tier lenders, and some people are worried, I really don't want to go to them. What if something happens to them? But that's not a real concern. It's not a serious concern, is it?
No, look, what we're seeing at the moment is second and third tier lenders and your non-banks. There's been a great rise in lending to them. We were very fortunate that Aussie John Simons and Mark Burris with Wizard Home Loans in the late 90s, 2000s, bought in competition. It held the banks to account, and now we've got an enormous amount of banks, second, third tiers, rural banks, all sorts of things like that. Non-banks, so people that get their money by securitization and things like that, and they don't have the branch network. So often they can do things a lot differently because they don't have the overheads and costs. They can be quite price sensitive. They can be a niche lender in terms of an investment or a home, or they can do things that sometimes the banks just can't either want to do, or can manage to do that. So I'm basically bank agnostic. Being loyal to your lender has proven through the Royal Commission, and even the ACCC late 2018 came out and said, if you're lazy, and we've spoken about people's laziness, if you're not checking your loan regularly and you're not going there, it was costing you somewhere between $850 and $1,300 a year. Now, if we're talking about spending less than you earn and having your living costs and everything under control, wouldn't it be nice to have $100 a month in your account rather than the bank? So I just think we've got to be really open in our thinking at the moment, open to positions, be willing to consider principal and interest. I mean, it's not the enemy. If you've got 2 loans, one's a home and one's an investment, ideally you want to pay down your non-deductible debt. But if moving forward with your investment journey, the only way you can get it is by paying principal and interest, I think you would advocate getting a good property in a good time in a good market and paying principal and interest is going to be better than being stubborn and pig-headed and say, no, unless it's interest only, I'm not proceeding. We've just got to be willing to think outside the square a bit. And I think there's a lot of options that we can consider and do with different lenders and different options, different opportunities. So I'd really encourage everyone to think just a little bit differently about the opportunity. There's a great amount of competition. There's hundreds of lenders out there that all do things a little bit differently. We have over 30 on our panel and are using more than we ever have, just to make sure we're getting the great outcomes for our clients.
Well, the answer is you've got no choice nowadays, because sometimes the banks won't lend you and the second-tier lenders will. You and I are old enough to remember this used to be the way years ago. There were building societies when the bank wouldn't lend you money. Then Aussie John and Mark Burris and Macquarie came in, and a whole lot of other Macquarie was a bank, but other non-bank lenders. And after the global financial crisis, that slowed down a bit. But they're now moving forward. And remember, you don't have to worry about them going broke, because first of all, they are still regulated. They're just not deposit-taking organisations. And the other thing is that you've got their money. So it's not a problem. They're not going to take it back from you once they've lent it to you. But I think another point that you made, and one I'd like to finish off on, is don't be complacent. Look at your loan situation. Ask, is this the right one? Can I do better? Can I get a better interest rate? Review your position, but don't be so smart and try and do it on your own. There's just too many options and it's just too complicated today. So get a good finance strategist on your side, Andrew.
Yeah, we encourage, I find it, I giggle a little bit when someone will shop around for a mobile phone contract that might save them, $5 or $10 a month, or they'll go to their, Foxtel provider or whatever it is, and they'll try and do that, but they will neglect their home loan and even their insurances, personal insurances and things like that. These things get better every year and cost less, and so do your loans. I mean, lending isn't a set and forget, and people are lazy, and we've talked a little bit about how hard it is, but that doesn't mean you can't still get a great outcome. You mightn't have the ability to refinance or something, but that doesn't mean you can't go back to your bank and look at that. We've done some great strategies late 2018 where we've been able to save people thousands of dollars, and in some instances tens of thousands of dollars, just through their laziness. They hadn't done a review for 4 or 5 years. Banks through late 2017 and 2018 started to distort the interest rates. They started to charge you more for interest only. They started to charge you more for investment again. And people just haven't done a review. And if you've got a line of credit, you pay even more again. But you can still get a better deal. You can still get a better outcome. But do a review. We do reviews for clients every other day and save them money and save them the grief. Like, we will take the grief out of that for them. But you just got to take the time. Don't be lazy. Take that time and effort to get yourself a better deal, because there are options that are out there.
Well, there's a whole list of things now that one can consider to make oneself more attractive to the banks. It's not as easy as going into a bank or going online and getting a loan anymore, but the answer is it probably never should have been as easy as that, because sensible investors, finance savvy people didn't get themselves into trouble, but a lot of ordinary Australians unfortunately did. So therefore, this is going to hopefully stop some of those people getting into trouble. Now, I know we're going to keep talking on my podcast, on these videos, and coming up real soon around Australia at my National Property Market and Economic Updates. So if people want to learn more about what's going ahead in the property markets, what we can see, what concerns we have, because there are some opportunities, but the winds have changed. Unless you change your sail, you're probably going to be going off course. So come along to my property market updates and hear Andrew Wilson, Ken Race. Andrew's going to be at some of those as well, Andrew Myrams. And I look forward to bringing these monthly think tanks to you. And Andrew, I'd love you to come back again and be my guest on another one.
Would love to, Michael. Thank you very much.